our series called Vibes. Now, when we're talking about vibes, we're talking about the emotions that you may feel on a week in and week out basis. But specifically, we're talking about emotions that control your life more than other ones. Last week, we talked about anger and how anger can control your life, but you shouldn't let it. And this week, we're going to be talking about fear. So to intro this topic of fear, I'm going to tell you about one of the times when I was most afraid. And really, it's a time when you shouldn't be afraid or you don't think you will be afraid. But then when you get to that moment, you are very afraid. And so this happened on the day of my wedding. I was standing in front of everybody. My now wife had not come out yet. But I was standing there by myself on stage with only Ronnie, who's the lead pastor here at Relevant. We were standing there, and he was, cracking some joke in my ear or something like that. And I'm, kind of laughing on the outside, but on the inside, I'm like, what's about to happen? Like, holy cow, I am freaking out on the inside. I was really, really scared. But I wasn't scared because I was getting married. I was excited to get married. The reason why I was scared was because I was putting what-if scenarios all in my head. And so when some of these what-if scenarios would have been, okay, let's think about, after you get married, you have kids eventually. Well, what if I'm not going to be a good dad? What if I'm not good at that? What if she decides right now it's time to go? What if she's like, you know what, I'm done. I can't do this. What if there's just a scenario in her head that this is not going to end up working out? What if this, what if that? There were so many what ifs that were going on in my mind that it made me really, really nervous and quite actually really scared. But here's the thing, when we're talking about fear, this one is just a little bit different because fear, it actually keeps us from trying new things. It has hurt our friendships. Fear has created a script in our head that convinces us something about us that may not necessarily be true. And the crazy thing about fear is that it's actually the reason why we are a human. Fear is a human emotion. Fear is something that actually makes us human. Fear actually comes from the fact that we gather information and we think about the future. We were recently talking about strengths with our student leaders, and one of the strengths that you can have is futuristic, which means you think into the future a lot. I think Danielle was one of our few students that had that as something that she does a lot. And one of the biggest issues with people who are futuristic is they sometimes fear a lot because they start thinking about the future so much that they don't know what it's going to be like. They can't control it, and so they actually end up fearing a whole lot. And it's actually the same ability. Fear is the same ability that actually allows us to hope, allows us to dream. Because when you hope and you dream, you're actually just creating what-if scenarios in your head. You're just positive about them. When you hope and dream, you're thinking, well, what if one day I hit that big shot in my basketball game? You're thinking, what if I got an A on that test? What if I got that job one day that I really want? What if I did this? What if I did that? That sounds a lot like saying, what if she doesn't love me anymore? That sounds a whole lot saying, what if I'm not going to be a good dad? The emotion of fear is the same emotion that actually, and the same ability that allows us to hope and to dream. That's why fear is a human emotion. And I think that a lot of us will read something from the Bible and it just simply says, fear not, right? Just fear not. Okay, that seems easy. Just don't fear. Yeah. I can read that and be like, okay, I'm just not going to fear anymore because Jesus said don't fear, right? Really simple, really practical. You read that once and you never fear again, right? Anybody ever read that and think, I'm never going to be afraid of anything ever again? If you do, you're crazy. But we're going to look at a couple practical ways where Jesus talks about fear, because Jesus talks about fear a whole lot throughout his ministry. Fear is one of the biggest things that he actually talks about throughout his entire ministry. So we're going to look at a couple passages where Jesus is directly talking about fear. We're going to start out in the book of Matthew, Matthew 10:16, and it says, I'm going to send you like sheep among wolves. That doesn't sound great, right? Jesus is talking to his 12 disciples, his 12 followers, the 12 people that he was closest to, his 12 best friends. And he's saying, you know what? Ultimately, I'm going to send you out like sheep among wolves. Well, what's a sheep? A sheep is an animal that is pretty much helpless without somebody or something guarding them. Sheep are stupid. If you see like a flock of sheep, if one of them goes up to an electric fence and touches an electric fence, it electrocutes them. Do you know what the rest of the flock does? They're dumb and they follow. And so every single sheep goes and hits the electric fence because they're dumb. What's a wolf? It's a predator. What do wolves do? They eat sheep. And so Jesus is telling his best friends, one day I'm going to send you out like sheep among wolves. And that doesn't sound like something that we all want to be a part of. I don't think that sounds like something that the 12 disciples want to be a part of. But we tend to read the story and we just stop there. We just stop, you know what? I'm going to be a sheep, but I'm going to face adversity, but I'm going to get through it. That's all we read. I'm going to get through this, and it's going to be great. Even though there's going to be wolves out there, we're going to go right past these wolves. It's going to be fine. But let's go to a different story real quick. We'll come back to that one at the end here, but let's go to a different one. So now we find the 12 disciples, same 12 guys who he called sheep. This is a little bit before he calls them sheep, but they're in a storm. They're on a boat. They're on this small little boat. It says, suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, and so the waves swept over the boat. So you have Jesus and his disciples in a small boat on a lake. And now all of a sudden, all these waves are starting to overtake this boat. It's starting to make this boat seem like it's going to sink. There's a big old storm there. They're freaking out, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever been on a boat in a storm. I've only been on a boat through like a little bit of rain. And just with a little bit of rain, the water gets real choppy. Now imagine a full-fledged storm. This thing would be huge. These guys were freaking out. And they're like, where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? He's the only person that could save us right now. And Jesus is in the back of the boat, not driving it. He's sleeping. Jesus is asleep in a boat that's in the middle of a storm. Jesus is sleeping. I don't know about you, but in a storm on a boat, I don't think I would be sleeping. Actually, I think I'd probably be hanging over the edge, probably puking because of the motion sickness. But Jesus was somehow able to sleep through this. And can you imagine when the disciples are scared out of their minds and then they think, wait, maybe this one guy, maybe Jesus can help us. Let's wake him up. At least he can help us, hold down some sails or something. He can help us out. And they go to Jesus. They run over. Jesus, help us, help us. They say, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. And the disciples were frustrated because they felt so alone. And they were scared. And in the moment, Jesus was just asleep. And how does Jesus respond to their fear? He looks at them and says, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Jesus says, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Now, I think if you think about the response the disciples would have, they'd say, why do you think we're afraid? We're about to drown. We're about to die. If you don't do something right now, you don't at least come and help us out, we're probably going to be dead because all ways point to death right now because we are about to drown. But Jesus is like, no, I got this. And ultimately, Jesus calms the storm. He stands up, he says, be calm, and the storm is gone. Now these guys are thinking, well, I didn't think that was going to happen, right? Nobody thinks Jesus is just going to stop the storm right there that they're going through. They were so terrified that they didn't even think Jesus could take care of it. The moral of this story is that no matter what your circumstance is, no matter what it is, in this one it happened to be they were in a storm on a boat, no matter how scary your circumstance is, Jesus remains calm through it. Jesus never once panicked. Jesus never got scared. Jesus remained calm through the entire thing. And so then his disciples were amazed. They said, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. Not only do us 12 people obey him, but the winds and the waves obey him. That just showed them even more that Jesus was who he said he was. And in that moment, in that one moment of their lives, their confidence in Jesus overcame their fear. The confidence that they had in Jesus overcame the fear of the storm. Now we're going to go to another situation where a very similar thing happened, where Jesus is also, they had just gotten done preaching to a large group of people, and Jesus says, hey guys, go ahead, go get back on a boat. I'm not going to go with you this time. I need to stay here. I need to rest. I've been preaching a lot lately. Go out, do your thing, go get some fish or something, go out on the boat. So they go out on a boat again. And while they're on this boat, guess what? There's another storm. You think, this is kind of repetitive. These guys are in a lot of storms. They maybe should get out of boats at this point. But most of them were fishermen, and so they were used to being a boat. They knew what to do. But again, there's a huge storm that came up, and it looked like they were about to drown again. And this time, like, oh no, we're so scared, we're so scared, we're so scared. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, we have Jesus. But he's still on land. He's not sleeping in the back of the boat this time. No one's going to be out here to say, be quiet, wave stop, storm, you're done. There's nobody there this time. And on top of that, all of a sudden they start thinking they see a ghost out in the distance. It turns out it's Jesus. Jesus in the distance, and this is where you may have heard the story of Peter, where he walks on water. He steps out of the boat into the storm. He's looking at Jesus. He's staring at him like right in the eyes, and Jesus says, come to me because you have faith. And he starts walking on water with Jesus, and then all of a sudden he looks at the storm. The storm is really scary. His fear, it starts to take over the faith that he has in Jesus. He begins to drown. Jesus grabs him, pulls him out of the water, pretty much says the same thing again. You have little faith, why did you doubt me? In the same situation, the fear overcame their faith in Jesus. And Peter did not believe that there was anything that Jesus could do to save him, even though 2 seconds earlier he was just walking on water. Ultimately, Jesus does save him. And again, in that moment, he gets to the moment where his faith in Jesus, after he's been saved, overtakes his fear of the storm. Jesus says this after he talks about sending his disciples as sheep among wolves. He says this, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but they cannot kill your soul. He's saying, if you're going to be afraid of something, don't be afraid of something that can just kill your body. Be afraid of something that can kill your soul. Because there's not a fear out there that you have that is of another person, that is of a situation in your life. None of those fears can kill your soul. They can kill your body, but they cannot kill your soul. So he's saying, you might be sheep among wolves, but those wolves can't do anything to you. Those wolves won't hurt you. He's saying, essentially what he's saying is God is the only one who can hurt you. God is the only one to fear. Now maybe you're thinking, should I fear God? Am I supposed to be afraid of God? But he's ultimately what he's saying is, one day I'm not going to be here, and you cannot be afraid to go into a situation because of the wolves, because of the people who are against you. When it comes to dealing with fear, and this is a really big deal, because God knows all about your fear, he is also with you in the middle of it. No matter what your fear may be, just like it was for the disciples on the boat, and then it was for Peter when he was walking on water, no matter what your fear is, God knows all about it. And he's there for you right in the middle of it. He's there with you in the middle of it. But Jesus isn't done teaching them about fear, because when they went on that second trip and ultimately Peter stepped out of the boat, Peter started to drown, and he's teaching them about fear. He ends up telling them, take courage, for it is I, do not be afraid. When they see Jesus out on the water, he's saying, take courage, don't be afraid. It's because it's me, it's Jesus. And so that's what gave them hope. That's what gave them that whole thing of I go from fear to I go to hope. It's the same emotion. They went from fearing the storm to feeling comfort in Jesus to Peter stepping out of the boat, only one being comfortable enough to step out of the boat. So Peter steps out, and then he's in the middle of it. How many of you have been in the middle of your fears before? How many of you have been in the middle of your fears? I see a few of you raising your hand. You guys, fear is out there. Fear might look like a storm. And Jesus is standing in the middle of that fear. And he's standing there and he's calling out to you. He's saying, it's I am here in the middle of your fear. Come to me. Now, there were 12 people in that boat, but only one had enough faith in Jesus to step out. Only one had the faith in Jesus that was needed to step out of the boat and start walking towards him. And it wasn't easy. He got the faith to step out. Now, it doesn't mean it wasn't shaky, because remember, he started to drown. He started to drown at one point because he started looking at the storm. He took his eyes off of Jesus and started looking around him. He's like, I'm walking on this water right now, but that storm looks real powerful. That stuff that was my fear, that I let Jesus take over because I saw him, that when I let Jesus take over, that fear starting to creep back in. That's when he started to drown. He reaches out his hand and Jesus pulls him out. Jesus saves him. And again, he said, you have little faith. Why did you doubt me? Now, Jesus is teaching them all about fear because one day Jesus wasn't going to be there anymore. Jesus knew that one day he was going to have to go and die on a cross so that their sins may be forgiven. And so he wanted to teach them as much as he could now that you didn't have to be afraid. That one day when they were left to the wolves, that you did not have to fear the wolves. But what happened? One day Jesus was arrested. You know where his disciples were? Not with Jesus. They weren't defending Jesus because they might be arrested too. Jesus was crucified on the cross. Where were his disciples then? They weren't with Jesus. They weren't trying to help him because they were afraid they were going to get crucified right next to him. Jesus died and he was buried the next day. Who went to his burial? Not his disciples, because they were afraid. They're afraid if they showed up that somebody might point out that, hey, you're with Jesus, and arrest them too, and that they would end up in the place right next to him, buried and dead. It took until day 3. It took not one of the disciples, not one of Jesus' closest friends. They were all too afraid to go and do anything. They just sat in a house for 3 days and did nothing. They were so afraid they didn't go out anywhere. It took a woman, a very powerful woman, who was friends with Jesus, to go and say, you know what, I'm going to go and tend to his body. What they would do after you would wrap a dead body, you would take care of it because it would start to smell when it would decay and everything. So they would try to preserve the body in the tomb as much as they could. This woman, again, not one of Jesus' best friends, but somebody who still followed Jesus, went out to the tomb, saw that the tomb was empty, came back to the disciples, said, hey, the tomb was empty. The disciples finally had at least enough faith to walk out and go to the tomb. They thought somebody stole the body. And so then they go back into hiding, and they're like, who could have stolen the body? Like, did you do it? Did you do it? They start kind of blaming each other. Who stole Jesus' body? Do we need to go find whoever stole this? And ultimately, Jesus shows up next to them. 3 days, they waited and did nothing because of their fear. After all these times, Jesus talked about fear. They were in 2 different storms. One of them walked on water and told them not to be afraid. Jesus told a storm to be quiet and the waves to be still, and that they shouldn't be afraid because Jesus is on their side. But guess what? They were still afraid. And it took them 3 days until Jesus finally showed up. Jesus physically showed up to them in person to where they believed, no, somebody didn't steal the body. Jesus had raised from the dead. It took them 3 days of being afraid where they could have done something to where they ended up doing nothing because of their fear. But because of the resurrection, the disciples and anyone who followed Jesus could put their faith in its place. Because Jesus conquered death. That is the one biggest fear of anybody. If you were to ask people what their biggest fear is, they'd probably either say death or public speaking. For some people, it's the exact same thing. Public speaking might as well be death. But for so many people, they are terrified of death. The disciples, they were terrified to die. They were terrified when Jesus died. But Jesus conquered the one thing that nobody had ever conquered before. And that was death. And so when Jesus was resurrected, when Jesus came back from death, they knew that whatever fear I have can be replaced by Jesus. Because if he can conquer death, he sure as heck can conquer my fear. So they didn't have fear anymore. So let's talk about Peter. Peter's the guy who stepped out of the boat and walked on water, almost drowned, had to get pulled out of the water by Jesus. That wasn't the last time Peter feared. Peter said that he would never deny Jesus. Peter ends up denying Jesus 3 times the day that Jesus is killed. Peter said that he would stay focused on what Jesus told him, that he was going to make sure that he would be by Jesus' side no matter what, that he would not let anything happen to Jesus. When they came to arrest Jesus, Peter panicked and he ran away. He said that he would always be there for Jesus, but he, like the other 11 disciples, were not there when Jesus died. Peter was a scared man. Peter, who talked about all this confidence and he wanted to always be there next to Jesus, and he said all these cool things. When it came down to it, Peter was afraid. But then, when Jesus came back, he knew he didn't have to fear any longer. Peter ended up writing a book of the Bible, actually called 1 Peter. And in 1 Peter, he says, cast your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Peter's not saying this because he just believes it. Peter's saying this because he believes it and he also knows it firsthand. Peter knew that he had the ability to put his fears on Jesus because he was a fearful person until Jesus came back. But what does this mean? When Peter says cast, it means throw, it means hurl, it means heave your anxieties onto Jesus because he cares for you. These are very active, they're very intentional words. It means that it doesn't happen by accident. You can't just expect your fear to go to Jesus because you follow him. You can't just expect your fear to go away because you said, you know what, I put my faith in Jesus. Your fear doesn't go away because of that. Those are action words. It says cast. That's an action. It's something you actively have to do in your life if something is ever going to change. You have to actively put your fear on Jesus in order not to experience it anymore. When you feel anxious, when you feel fearful, when you feel worry, take it and throw it on Jesus. But you might say, Coleman, I don't know how to do that. I have no idea how to do that. So here's 4 things that you could do in order to do that effectively. The first thing you have to do is you have to name it. Remember we talked about that week 1. You have to actively name whatever it is that you're afraid of. Write it down. Put it in a journal somewhere. That's step 2, write it down. Because if you write it down, you're going to be more likely to remember it. You're going to be more likely to approach it next time it comes up. And you can say something as intentional as, I'm afraid of blank. Or, I'm afraid if blank happens. I'm afraid of this situation. Then throw that fear on Jesus and write it down again. Say, you know what? Because of Jesus, I can put this fear on him and I don't have to fear this situation anymore. I don't have to fear when this happens anymore because of Jesus. I guarantee you start doing it, you start writing down what your fear is. And then right after you say, you know what? I don't have to fear this because of Jesus. You're going to start feeling some relief of that fear. You're going to feel like, you know what? I don't have to have this fear in my life anymore. And the 4th thing that you can do is talk to your small group leader about your fear. Talk to your small group about your fear. Fear is something we all experience. I'm going to talk to the guys for a second. We like to pretend like we don't fear anything. Or if we do, it's like, oh yeah, horror movies or something. Yeah, I'm afraid of that. There's situations in your life that are okay to fear. But you need to approach that fear if you're ever going to do anything about it. I could have just stood there on my wedding day and thought, what if this happens? What if that happens? I mean, in all honesty, I was thinking about that before my wedding day. It just all came up all at once while I'm standing up there waiting for my wife to walk down the aisle. But if I didn't approach that fear at all, to this day I would still be living in fear, worried, what if she fell out of love with me? What if one day when I'm a dad, I'm just not a good one? But I know because of Jesus that those fears that I have in my life, those situations that have yet to happen, I don't have to worry about those yet. I don't have to have that fear in my life. So what's your fear? School? Grades? College? Sports? What's your fear? Parents? A relationship? What's your fear? Think about them. Think about what your fear may be. Write it down. Talk it out. Let people know what your fear is. Because the more people that know, the more likely you are to do something about it. So as we wrap up today, I want us to go into our small groups thinking about our fears. Not because we're just going to talk about what we're afraid of. We're going to talk about, oh, I hate it when I see a spider. Or I'm just really nervous that what if it comes down to that last second shot? What if I have to be the person that takes it? What if, well, I don't want to talk about midterms forever because those are coming up in like six weeks or something like that. So you're already freaking out because your midterms are coming. They're not even anywhere close. That's not what we're going to be talking about. We're talking about how we can get over our fears. How we can get past our fears. Use the examples that the disciples gave us. Use the examples that we talked about. They had to get over their fears. Peter stepped out of the boat. Peter stepped into the middle of his fear because he knew Jesus was there. How are you going to step into the middle of your fear? No matter what it is in your life, no matter what situation, what relationship, anything, how are you going to step into the middle of your fear? So while we can learn from our emotions, we need to know that because of Jesus, because of the resurrection, fear doesn't have to control our lives. So I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to break out into our small groups. Again, if you are new and you don't really know what small group to go to, come up to me. I can get you to your small group this week. I can introduce your small group leader. If you know where you're going, then you know where you're going. So would you pray with me real quick? Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you that we have the opportunity to come and talk about fear. But because of you, we don't have to fear anything. That because of you, we don't have to have fear controlling our lives. I pray that as we break out into our small groups, we would feel challenged by this. We would approach our fears. We would talk about our fears. That way one day we could also get over our fears. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.